Our big story tonight is on the adjournment of that meeting between IEBC, Jubilee and NASA representatives. Failing to reach an agreement, we understand the meeting will resume again tomorrow morning. But even as that meeting was taking place, there was word coming out that there are some amendments that have been proposed to the electoral laws in the country, and they are set to be tabled tomorrow before the House. I still have my guests with me. That is the Jubilee Party Secretary General Raphael Tuju, as well as Willis Otieno, who is the head of the Raila Campaign Secretariat. Your feedback tonight, Elias Mutuma on Twitter. You remember Elias, he was Ekuru Aukot's lawyer at the Supreme Court. He says the proposed amendments are in futility. The law cannot apply retrospectively. Samuel Kiboro on Twitter says NASA has irreducible minimums, and now so does Jubilee in Parliament. So I want to start with you again, Willis, because you've talked about these laws being acts of parliament that are set to change the constitution, and that may not happen. But so where do we go from here in terms of the meeting tomorrow? Because Raphael is saying you are not ready to get to the talks today and didn't get into the substance of that, and that what happens in parliament should not necessarily affect the talks with IBC.
When we say that we didn't want to engage in those talks today, look at what we are even calling our irreducible minimums. These are largely what you call administrative safeguards that will ensure that we have free and fair election processes. Some of them, for example, we talk about, let's comply with the minor KI case, which says presidential elections are constituency-based as provided for in Article 138(2) of the Constitution. So that we want IEBC to set up mechanisms administratively that applies that provision of the Constitution and complies with the orders of the Court of Appeal in minor KI case. You do not need to go to Parliament to discuss that. What Jubilee is engaging in is undermining, and that's why the word I'm using, the word to undermine their commitment to the talks that IEBC has convened. So that you cannot be having a discussion around a particular subject, then one of the players decide to mischievously go and introduce what you call a raft of amendments to the election laws, so that as you discuss, you do not even know what else they are trying to change, because part of what is being discussed in these talks may actually require or may be anchored in a legislation. So we have one common ground to discuss, which will be the IEBC convened forum. Then whatever is agreed on, if need be, that you want to make amendments to the law, you go to Parliament and amend those laws. But to have parallel processes, it is nonsensical. It's actually a waste of the people's time, that you will not even know the actual outcome. And I've just listened to what Sophia Wanuna said. Some of the things they're even proposing, they are unconstitutional by their very nature.
Such as?
Why are they doing so?
Such as? Willis?
One example that I've given you, when they talk about they want to change the manner in which you transmit election results. That question of how to transmit results is founded in the Constitution. The manner in which the elections are conducted must be verifiable. How do you verify if you don't use technology as a means to verify?
So, Willis, what you're saying is that it would be impossible to verify votes and numbers if not transmitted electronically?
If you do not impute technology in the process, you undermine the means through which you can verify.
Raphael, what do you think?
Alf, let me tell you. First of all, my brother is talking about starting a parallel process. I'd rather have a parallel process in Parliament than the parallel process they have started in the streets. In fact, I did raise it in the meeting today that ODM NASA have categorically said there will be no elections. What does that mean? What does that mean? Is it a parallel process of how things should be conducted in this country? And they have not come out clean on that. When we went into this meeting, the first thing they said, there will be no talks unless this is included in the agenda. We said, fair enough, let's include that in the agenda. Now, there's a team which they no to Chiloba, no to IBC, no to Safaricom, except for the M-Pesa pay bill number that they have, no Al-Ghurair, no elections, no, I don't know who, Safran Morpho. A point reaches that we need our institutions like Parliament and the Supreme Court and our courts to be able to secure this country in the face of this kind of unreasonable behavior from NASA.
Yes?
Let me just...
And in fact, let me just finish. If I may finish.
When we say no to something, there must be a reason. And it's even better that we find a basis when we say, for example, that Al Ghurair should not print these ballots and election declaration forms. The Supreme Court, in its own finding, indicted the forms that were used to declare these election results. Some of them were fake. In other words, the printer must bear the burden of that finding by the Supreme Court. When we say that we don't want Otimofo to be involved in this particular election, the reason exists. The reason is that Otimofo, until today, has defied an order of the Supreme Court of Kenya to allow access, read-only access, to the servers that were used to transmit results of this particular election. Until this point, Otimofo has not provided the KIMS transaction logs that were used to identify persons who appeared before polling stations to vote. So that we are not just saying no for nothing. We are simply saying these persons that we are saying should not involve themselves in the coming elections have been found through a competent judicial process to have undermined the exercise of free, fair, democratic electoral processes in the Republic of Kenya.
Raphael?
Well, let me just finish off what I was saying. First of all, I think my brother is misleading Kenyans that the issue of electronic transmission of results is in our constitution. It isn't. It is not, and I can confirm that. You can go check the constitution. There's nowhere where it is a requirement that we use electronic transmission. By the way, in Germany, they finished the elections on Sunday, and the Supreme Court, or the highest court of Germany, has outlawed the use of electronic voting and specifically electronic transmission. I think there's something that we should be able to learn from the Germans as well. At this particular moment in time, we are spending a lot of time from our friends from the opposition talking about servers, talking about KIMS, talking about 3G, 4G, things which the ordinary Kenyans do not understand. Our voting is manual, and I think one of the justices in the Supreme Court described this very well. I don't need to go back to that. Finally, the moment you come into a meeting and say that you have certain irreducible minimums. In fact, I did pose that question to the session. If you are starting from the point of irreducible minimum, it's a very, very arrogant position to start from. If it is irreducible, why are we talking about it in the first place? Then go ahead. In fact, I did invite them that you don't have to participate in the talks. You don't even have to participate in an election. We don't have to have the election. Let me tell you, the sun will rise and the sun will set even if you don't participate in the elections.
Willis, hardline position from NASA and the team?
There's nothing about hardline positions from NASA. I've just told you, when we mention some of these people as irreducible minimum, how can you go to an election with a company that has been condemned by the highest court in the land? You can't argue over that. When we talk about Safran Mofo, until today, as I'm sitting here, Safran Mofo has not opened up its servers in continued contempt of the Supreme Court of Kenya. So that when we say we don't want that kind of a character engaged in our elections, we are simply trying to enforce. We are actually, in essence, saying, let's have a partner who will respect the institutions set up by this country. So it is not hardline stance. The hardline stance is when Jubilee itself decides to undermine what we thought was a genuine engagement with the referee. They decide to go to a parliament, which parliament itself also, its own legality, its own constitutionality may be brought into question. Now, let me say this. When Raphael says that the Constitution does not provide for electronic transmission, nothing could be further from the truth. The Constitution has set out principles that are supposed to govern the electoral system. That's Article 81. And one of those principles is verifiability and accountability. How do you verify a manual process without imputing technology in it? And it is wrong for Raphael to say that in Germany, they've done away with electronic voting. The voting component is different from results transmission or electronic identification of persons. What they've walked away from is voting electronically, not imputing technology in electoral processes.
Is it a show of bad faith, Raphael, that whilst the talks are taking place, that amendments are being proposed on the floor of the House?
I think it is really a show of bad faith that our brothers from NASA are talking about mass action, giving us, on the government side, 24-hour notice for this, 24-hour notice for that, and essentially, you know, beating their chest, saying there will be no elections. And we ask them exactly, what do you mean by that? We say, we mean exactly that. There will be no elections. And I think we are quite much in order to use legal means to address some of the challenges that we are faced with at the moment because of the intransigency of NASA. And just to correct him once again, I can be able to say emphatically that there's nowhere in the Constitution where we refer to electronic voting. We talk about being able to verify, being transparent and all that, but there's nowhere in the Constitution which says that transmission will be electronic. And I want to correct you again on the issue of Germany. Germany has outlawed electronic transmission. It's been outlawed.
All
so
right.
I think there's something that they know that we should be able to learn from them. And at this particular moment in time, what our brothers in NASA are holding on to, they don't want to talk about the number of registered voters, which they know very well. They don't want to talk about what is in the boxes. They're talking about things that they believe they can be able to hang on to, and the rest of Kenyans will not understand. In fact, most Kenyans, 90% to 95% of Kenyans, do not know what a server is. They don't even know how it looks like.
All right.
But they're hanging on to this and hoping that they'll be able to mobilize emotions and, in a way, get their way.
All right,
when
gentlemen.
I talk about what is in the boxes, let me just say this, and that is one reason why we say Al Ghurair should be part of this process. Al Ghurair printed over 2 million presidential ballot box papers in this country. As of now, they've not even accounted. We've not had an accountability mechanism.
All right,
how
but
those
yet,
extra ballots
Willis,
were used. And we're
but
saying Jubilee has stuffed them. That's why they're confident and beating their chest. Let's go and open those boxes. They know that they stuffed the ballots.
And
Willis.
If you could allow me, if you could allow me also.
Yes, but yet, no, allow me to put this in. But yet, both of you, both NASA and Jubilee, are opposed to UNDP participating in this exercise and providing ballot papers. I'd like to know why.
Let me give you an example. In Haiti, UNDP engaged itself in procuring the ballots for that country. What happened? Over 77% of the ballots could not be engaged in. Who was their service provider? Al Ghurair. Go to Sierra Leone, again, Liberia, UNDP has been involved in. What was the outcome of that election? Several questions as to how that process was run. What we are simply saying is this. It is not about just giving UNDP. We cannot also just surrender our sovereignty without following the provisions of our Constitution. The parameters within which those electoral processes must be done are set in the Constitution. So that if you have more than half of a country saying, we do not want this service provider for the simple reason that this service provider has engaged in electoral malpractices in Kenya. What is so difficult, for example, of us saying, let's go to Europe. There are so many companies that can print those ballot papers.
Raphael?
What is this fascination with Al Ghurair? And remember, Al Ghurair, as a company, has been involved in extraneous litigation in this country right from the year 2016 until today. They still have cases in court that involve printing of ballots.
I'd like to give Raphael a moment to answer the question as to why Jubilee is opposed to UNDP printing our ballot papers.
Well, let me put it this way. First of all, let's go to Saffron Morpho, and I think I want to correct one of the impressions, actually a statement made by my brother. He's saying that the Supreme Court condemned Saffron Morpho and Al Ghurair for that matter. The truth of the matter is, I've looked at that judgment. There's nowhere, absolutely nowhere, where the Supreme Court singled out any supplier.
But the process that supplier was engaged in is singled out. The question of servers is a Saffron Morpho issue. The process, the question of ballot papers is an Al Ghurair issue. The question of result declaration forms is an Al Ghurair issue.
All right,
so that when that process is condemned, the company that is involved takes responsibility.
All right, Willis, let's let Raphael finish.
Yes, thank you very much, Yvonne. The truth of the matter is that they did not mention any of these suppliers by name. If there were, then there's no way by which those suppliers can continue.
Okay, so...
the other thing, and I think it is disingenuous for him to say that they were condemned by the Supreme Court. The truth is, the Supreme Court has not referred to any supplier. Let's not mislead Kenyans
Okay,
here.
all right. Rafael, I
been
think your point is made.
The declaration, the question of servers is condemned in the judgment. I've read that judgment. I'm the lawyer between the two of us here. It condemns the process through which the results were transmitted.
Okay, Willis.
The inability to allow access to those servers is
Willis,
condemned.
your point is made and understood. Willis, we really have to close our show today. Chabukati Wafula, who's the chair of the IEBC and the chair of these talks, says that the talks will resume again tomorrow morning. I've got just exactly 1 minute for either of you, for each of you, to tell us what will be happening at the talks tomorrow, what will be the mood, what will be the nature of the talks, what will you be coming to the table to do, because we know of the disagreements that were reached late this evening. Rafael, I'll start with you.
Well, we're going into the talks in good faith, and I want to compliment the team from NASA. I think they were very constructive. I think that we were very, very polite to each other. We treated each other with respect. We do understand that the country is very concerned, rightly so, about this engagement between us and the IEBC and, of course, NASA. One of the things that is important to know and to appreciate is that this is an IEBC meeting.
Okay.
It is not a forum for argument between us and NASA.
All right, gotcha.
At the end of the day,
it is
the referee which is going to decide what goes on.
Got you on that, Rafael. Willis, you have now less than a minute, please.
My point is that it's good that the Commission has seen it fit to consult with the primary stakeholders in this process. That's a welcome move, and I just hope that Jubilee will drop those extraneous measures that they're trying to adopt to undermine what IEBC is convening in good faith, so that if there are any issues that they want to be addressed, those can form part of the agenda that this meeting should discuss and come up with the solutions on how they're supposed to be addressed. So that instead of going to engage in another process that may end up undermining a genuine conversation that the Commission has convened, it will not help drive this process forward. Okay. I just do hope that Jubilee will see the sense of this sense in the need to have and bring everything on the table so that all parties can discuss them under the auspices of the Commission. Thank
you. Willis Otieno, who's the head of the Raila Campaign Secretariat, and Rafael Tuju, who is the Secretary General of the Jubilee Party, on the talks at IEBC, which resume tomorrow. And, of course, those proposed amendments that we understand will be tabled on the floor of the House tomorrow as well. That is our big story tonight. Thanks for joining me. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. We'll see you again tomorrow at 8 p.m. when we will be tracking the big story of the day. Good night, everyone.